Hey guys, I'm going to go over each question from this quiz. Our grades were not where I would have preferred them to be, considering this is a unit that is completely review. You have learned all of this back in 6th grade even. Didn't really hear from anybody this week as far as if they had any questions. So please make sure that if there's something you don't understand as we do the notes and homework, that you come to my office hours and ask questions. That's going to be your best bet. So number 1, it says evaluate the expression for the given values when a is -1/2, b is -5, x is -1/5, and y is 3. So there's obviously extra information there. So we have a cubed divided by 0.125 minus ab cubed. Like I've always told y'all, when y'all substitute a number for a variable, you've got to put parentheses around that number. So that'd be a -1/2 cubed divided by 0.125 minus -1/2 times b cubed, which would be -5 cubed. So we're going to first deal with our exponents. So we have -1/2 cubed, so -1/2 times the -1/2 is a positive 1/4. 1/4 times the -1/2 is going to be a -1/8 divided by 0.125 minus a -1/2 times a -5 cubed. So that's -5 times -5, which is a positive 25, and then 25 times a -5 is a -125. Now we have multiplication, subtraction, or division, subtraction, and multiplication. So we do division first. So -1/8 divided by 0.125, you'd plug that into your calculator. Hopefully y'all see that that's just a -0.125. But if not, -1/8 divided by 0.125 is going to give you a -1. So we have -1 minus, now we can do this multiplication. So we have a -1/2 times -125, and that is 62.5. So now we have -1 minus 62.5, and that is equal to a -63.5. Number 2 said evaluate the expression when a is -1/2, b is -5, x is, and it's the same exact ones. So now we have -4 times the absolute value of a -x cubed. So we're going to substitute x. We're going to plug in -1/5 for that, and we are going to put parentheses around the -1/5 cubed. Okay, -1/5 cubed, so that's going to be a -1/5 times the -1/5, which would be 1/25, and then 1/25 times a -1/5 is going to be a -1 over 125. So we have -4 times the absolute value of the opposite of a -1 over 125. Should be in parentheses. Okay, now we're still working inside these parentheses, which are the absolute value, but that's a form of parentheses. So we have -4. The opposite of a -1/25 is 1 over 1/25. And the absolute value of 1/25 is 1 over 125. And then when we do that multiplication, we get -4 over 125. And you would plug that in your calculator to get that as a decimal, because that's what you had to plug in. And that'd be a -0.032. Number 3 says to simplify this expression. So we have 4 minus 3 times 12 times 3 minus 4, and we're closing the bracket. So brackets are also a form of parentheses like we've talked about. So now we need to do PEMDAS within those brackets. So that'd be 4 minus 3 times 12 times negative 1. And now we can do that multiplication. Now we have subtraction and multiplication. We do multiplication first. So we have 4 minus 3 times a negative 12 is a negative 36. And we would do keep, change, change to get 40. Number 4. We have negative 5 Sorry guys, I'm trying to find these questions. Okay, found it. All right, we have negative 5 squared times negative 8 divided by negative 10 squared. So when you have a fraction, you work in the numerator and then you work in the denominator and you keep them separate until the very end. So we have in our numerator, we need to do our exponent first. So we have the opposite of 5 squared. So that would be the opposite of 25 times negative 8 over, now we can do the denominator. We have negative 10 squared, which would be 100. And now we can do that multiplication. So negative 25 times negative 8 would be 200 divided by 100, and now we can simplify those at the end. Number 5, let's do that up here. So number 5, we have 88 divided by 8 times 1/4 times 9 minus 5 squared plus 9 to the 0 power. So we're going to work within the brackets first. We're going to do PEMDAS within those brackets, which would first be the parentheses. And then we will do the exponents in those brackets. And then we can do that multiplication in the brackets. 1/4 times 16 will give us 4 plus 9 to the 0 power. Now we can do our exponents out here. And then we just work our way left to right doing our division and then multiplication. So 88 divided by 8 is 11 times 4 plus 1, which would be 44 plus 1, which would be 45. Number 6, we're going to simplify this expression. So we have negative 4 squared minus 1 cubed minus 4 times the absolute value of 1 minus 3. And then that answer, we are going to cube it. So we need to first work in these parentheses first. So 1 minus 3 is negative 2, and the absolute value of negative 2 would be 2. Now we need to do our exponent. So we have negative 4 squared, which would be 16, minus 1, minus 4 times 8. That would be 2 cubed. We have subtraction and multiplication, so we got to do our multiplication first. So 16 minus 1 minus 32. And then we do our subtraction. We work left to right, so that'd be 15 minus 32. And we get negative 17. Number 7. We have the opposite of 4 cubed divided by negative 8 times 2 plus a negative 7. So we're going to do our exponents first, and that would be the opposite of 4 cubed. So that would be the opposite of 64, which would be a negative 64. Then we have division, multiplication, and addition. So we're going to do our division first. So negative 64 divided by negative 8 would be 8 times 2 plus a negative 7. The multiplication comes first. And then we have 16 plus negative 7, which would come out to be 9. Number 8. Choose the statement below which is true when x is a positive. So in column A, we have a negative times a positive times another negative times a positive. So a negative times a positive is a negative, times a negative is a positive, times a positive is a positive. In column B, we have a positive times a negative times a positive times a positive. So a positive times a negative will be a negative, times a positive is a negative, times a positive is a negative. And so column A is greater than column B because one's positive and one's negative, and that would be answer A. The quantity in column A is greater. Number 9, choose a statement below that's true when given that x is 81. So in column A, we have 2 times the square root of 81 plus 31. So that would be 2 times the square root of 81 is 9 plus 31. And that would be 18 plus 31, which would be 49. In column B, it would be 9 minus 5 times the square root of 81, which would be 9 minus 5 times 9, which would be 9 minus 45, which would be a negative 36. We're asking which one, we want to know which one's a perfect square. We can't have negative square roots. We cannot take the square root of a negative. So that answer would be A, that the quantity in column A is a perfect square because 49 is. And then lastly, number 10, which expression will be negative when simplified? So on A, we have a negative times a negative, which would be a positive. That's when we squared it. So that won't be right. On B, we're going to take a negative and multiply it by itself 6 times. So a negative times a negative is a positive, times a negative is a negative, times a negative is a positive, times a negative is a negative times a negative would be a positive. On C, we have 3, which is a positive, times a negative times the opposite of 9 squared. So a positive times a negative is a negative, times a positive is a negative, times a positive is a negative. In D, we are doing a negative multiplied by itself 3 times. And then we're multiplying that by another negative that's multiplied by itself 3 times. So a negative times a negative is a positive, times a negative is a negative, times a negative is a positive, times a negative is a negative, times a negative would be a positive, and that's why our answer was C. Number 11, we need to simplify that expression. So we have 1/2 times 8x minus 6.5y plus 12z. So we need to distribute that, and that will give us 4x, and then 6.5 times 1/2 is going to be minus 3.25y plus 6z. And number 12, we have to simplify again, so it's negative 8 times 2x minus 7 minus 8 plus 3y. So we are going to distribute to get negative 16x plus 56 minus 8 plus 3y. We get negative 16x plus 3y because you can't combine anything with those two. And then we have 56 minus 8, which will be plus 48 at the very end. Oh, sorry. So that answer is, that answer is D. And number 11 was the answer B. All right, if y'all have any questions, please let me know.